We're now joined by the CEO of BrickBuilt Therapeutics, Dr. Brian Klein. Welcome, Brian. I'd like to begin today's discussion asking you what the FDA approval process is for some of these live biotherapeutic products, the LBPs you talked about, and where BrickBuilt's technology is along that process.
Thank you. So the FDA created the LBP category or track about a decade ago. And this in general would involve an IND and then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. So far, this has been mainly gut and skin companies that have gone through this process or going through the process. And given the lower complexity in terms of dosing and sampling for the mouth, as well as the availability of people with oral diseases, because they're much more prevalent than a lot of these other indications, we expect the clinical trials to take between 3 and 4 years. And then the preclinical microbiome work in general takes 1 to 2 years. So our timeline for any indication would be between 5 from the beginning of screening isolates all the way to the end of a clinical trial, assuming clinical efficacy. And importantly, when it comes to understanding the process of getting an LBP into and through the clinic, but mainly into, LBPs are living entities. And this is different than small molecules and other drugs. So when you think about dose, microbes reproduce. So things like dose is relative, and pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, these actually take on a different meaning in general. But you start with characterizing your drug substance. So what is the name or species and strain, source, passage history, donor information, phenotype, genotype, mechanism of action, and then depending upon what your drug product is from your drug substance, identity, purity, potency, microbial bioburden, and stability.
And there are many different startups in this microbiome space. How does BrickBuilt Therapeutics differentiate, and where does that microbial culture collection that was mentioned in the film come into play in that differentiation?
So if we focus on therapeutics, so drug companies, we are the only microbiome company specifically targeting diseases of the oral cavity. And so this would be diseases such as gum disease, cavities, oral candidiasis, and then other oral-centric diseases, at least publicly. And so the way that our microbial library comes into play here is, and this is a differentiator for all companies in this area of the microbiome. If you're going to be treating gut diseases, you probably want to have gut microbes. If you're doing skin, you want to have skin microbes. And since we're in the oral cavity, we have a first-in-class isolate library from the oral cavity. And so what we've started to do and are in the process of right now is we've gotten donors from around the world. We have international donor collection already. And this is a sample both for sequencing and isolation. And the isolation one is absolutely key when you're talking about a company that is essentially doing bugs as drugs. So you have to have the sample or the material to get strains from. And so what we've done is we've isolated microbes from each donor, and we want breadth and depth. So as many donors as possible from around the world to get the sample from the microbes that could essentially inhabit the mouth. And then depth is how many species can we compare across these people to understand what strains we actually want to put in our cocktail after screening them.
And what is your strategy to create a moat and protect the intellectual property around this microbial collection?
So IP in the microbiome space is very interesting. And so it starts with donor material and isolates or strains being proprietary, right? So those are yours. You do not want to be giving them out to everyone to do other things with. And then the screening processes, they can be either proprietary or simply just hard to do, even if anyone knew how to do them aside from us. And then preclinical and clinical regimens, those can be proprietary and patentable, as well as microbial cocktails. So thinking about, okay, what microbes am I using in my drug? And then understanding how you mix them potentially with a prebiotic or with strains from multiple different people, that itself is also patentable.
In the film that we just watched, gum disease was listed as the primary indication or the first indication you're going after. Can you talk about the market size for this indication?
Absolutely. So the market size or the segment of the market that we are specifically targeting are the about $500 million a year that are spent on antibiotics as essentially an adjunct to gum disease treatment. And so we want to supplant this with the value proposition of, antibiotics in general are not good to be giving out for this, and the efficacy is relatively limited. So we're bringing something in that is safer and potentially more efficacious than what's currently out there.
Last question, Brian. What are you fundraising and how are you going to use this money to continue BrickBuilt's success?
So we're raising $1.5 million, and this will take us through 18 months at our new home at the Harvard Life Lab through our gum disease declaration, so the cocktail that we will bring forward to the clinic, as well as building out the rest of our microbial culture collection.
Thank you so much, Brian, for speaking with us today. Appreciate your time. If you in the investor audience would like to book time directly with Brian, please feel free to do so using the link down below. Now, we're about to get a peek into the far future from our IndieBio New York Class 2 CEOs. But first, what is better than a delicious and sustainable ingredient for the plant-based food industry? A delicious, sustainable, and functional ingredient for that same industry. This is Microterra.